Welcome to Life Stories, where silence isn't weakness, it's strategy, and love doesn't always look like sacrifice until you see it through tears. Imagine spending 40 years quietly preserving a family treasure while your own child believes it was lost forever, because that's what you let him believe. What would make a mother choose secrecy over recognition? What happens when the truth is no longer a burden, but a weapon? This is a story about legacy, about the quiet strength of women who build worlds while the world forgets their names. It's about the moment a mother is uninvited from her son's wedding and the moment she decides to rewrite the ending. Stay with us, because what starts as rejection becomes something no one saw coming, and it all begins right here. Margot Bennett had always been a woman of quiet certainties. She believed in the power of handwritten notes, the comfort of worn-in denim, and the truth that some things, like loyalty, like land, should never be sold. For 45 years, she'd lived her life under the radar, retreating from noise, from conflict, from the world that had once humiliated her and called it fairness. She kept her promises, even the ones no one knew she'd made, especially those. It was a soft September evening when everything changed. The dinner invitation had arrived via text, an unusual move for her son Ryan, who preferred emails and formalities these days. "Just us three," he wrote. Brooke made her famous fig crostini. "We want to talk wedding updates." Margot stared at the screen for a long moment, sensing the hollowness behind his casual tone. The updates, she knew, weren't going to be about seating charts or flower arrangements. She wore navy. Simple, clean, and just structured enough to remind herself who she was. Her mother's pearls fastened around her neck with trembling fingers. When she arrived at Ryan and Brooke's penthouse, the valet barely nodded before opening her door, and the elevator whooshed her up to the clouds. The apartment was a glass cathedral, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle skyline. Brooke glided out from the kitchen like a curated dream in soft beige cashmere. Her smile was perfect, hollow. "Margot, you look lovely," she said. "Champagne?" Margot declined with a smile and followed Brooke to the dining area, where Ryan stood by the panoramic window, his back straight, shoulders too stiff. He kissed her cheek quickly and gestured to the table. "Let's sit." As Margot took her seat, she noticed three place settings: a white envelope with her name in calligraphy and a chilled bottle of Veuve Clicquot nestled in a silver bucket between linen napkins folded like swans. It felt like a negotiation, not a meal. Brooke launched in gently. "We've made some last-minute adjustments to the guest list. With the venue being so intimate and exclusive, and with Ryan's father hosting his business network, we're prioritizing attendees who align with certain expectations." "Expectations," Margot echoed, her voice calm, as if she were grading a student essay. Brooke smiled. "We just want you to feel comfortable, Margot. The weekend might be overwhelming. We thought it might be nicer, simpler, if we celebrated with you privately once we're back." Ryan added quickly, "Dad's planning something special for you. A surprise." Margot didn't flinch. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. "Remember the old family cottage at Summit Hollow?" Ryan asked. "Dad found out it's up for sale again. He's negotiating to buy it back. He wants to gift it to us, restore the family legacy. Isn't that amazing?" Brooke leaned in. "We're thinking of tearing it down and building something new, sleek, sustainable, a legacy home for future generations." The word tore something open in Margot's chest. Legacy. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a slim leather folder. Placing it carefully on the table, she slid it toward Ryan. "Before you go any further," she said softly, "I think you should read this." Ryan hesitated. Brooke blinked, her smile faltering. The envelope sat between them like a live wire. Inside, the original deed to the Summit Hollow property dated 3 months before Margot's divorce. Continuous tax receipts under a trust bearing her maiden name. Photographs, fresh ones, of the cabin, maintained, cared for, alive. A book on the windowsill, a kettle on the stove. Her life hidden in plain sight. Ryan's hands began to shake. "You never sold it," he said, barely audible. "No," Margot replied. "I preserved it, quietly, for you, For this family. While your father wove stories about liquidation and finality, I was scraping together teachers' paychecks to pay for roof repairs and forest clearing. Brooke's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered across the marble. Silence. Ryan stared at the photos, at the reality that had been buried under assumptions and inheritance fantasies. Why didn't you tell me? Margot leaned forward. Because at first, it was about protection, but eventually it became about recognition, and I knew I couldn't have one without the other. He stood abruptly, walking to the window. His reflection in the glass, older now, more tired, seemed like a stranger. Dad said it was gone. He told me we lost it. He was going to surprise us with it. Was he? Planning to take credit for saving something he tried to destroy? Margot asked. Yes, that would be in character. Brooke looked between them, pale and wordless. I've amended the trust, Margot said finally. It now leaves the cottage to the Summit Hollow Conservancy upon my death. It will be preserved, untouched, forever. Ryan turned. You're cutting me out. I'm cutting out entitlement, she said. If I'm not worthy to be at your wedding, then perhaps my sacrifices aren't worthy of your future. What would you do if your child tried to erase you from their most important day? Have you ever kept a truth so long it turned into power? The wedding was weeks away, but the real ceremony, the one between love and legacy, silence and truth, had already begun. Continue to part 2. Brooke's unexpected visit forces a reckoning none of them could have seen coming. The rain came the morning after. It hadn't rained in weeks, but now, just as Margot sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed though she hadn't slept a minute, the sky broke open like a wound. The soft patter on her window felt almost scripted, like the universe needed to punctuate what had just unfolded the night before. Ryan hadn't called. She didn't expect him to. Still, she stared at her silent phone for hours. She went about her morning as she always did. Coffee brewed strong, news barely audible in the background, the same wooden spoon to stir her oatmeal. But everything felt heavier, coated in the thick residue of a truth no longer hidden. The air in her home, once a place of quiet certainty, now felt pressed in, like something waiting to be said still lingered. It wasn't until just after noon that her phone buzzed. Not Ryan. Brooke. The message was simple. Can we talk? Just us. 10 a.m. tomorrow. Riverside Cafe. No emoji. No polite phrasing. Just direct, restrained, urgent. Margot read it 3 times before responding with a single word. Yes. The cafe was one of those in-between places. Not quite trendy, not quite forgotten. The kind of space where 2 women could sit across from each other with decades of silence and misunderstanding between them and still not draw attention. Brooke was already there, seated in the corner, no makeup, hair pulled into a loose bun. Her coat was draped over her chair like she'd forgotten about it. She looked smaller without the high heels and polish, almost unsure of her own space. Margot approached slowly, unsure of what version of Brooke she was about to meet. Thank you for coming, Brooke said quietly as Margot sat down. Of course, Margot replied, folding her hands in her lap. How's Ryan? Brooke didn't answer right away. She looked down at her untouched cup of coffee, then up again, her eyes softer than Margot had ever seen them. He's unraveling, she said, not in a dramatic way. But I think something cracked open last night, and now he doesn't know who he is. Margot said nothing. I need to apologize, Brooke added, her voice trembling slightly, for how we handled everything, for that dinner, for the cruelty of it. Margot looked at her, studied the young woman who had once seemed so composed, so sure, and now sat shaking in a neighborhood cafe, stripped of every layer but her voice. What changed? Margot asked. Brooke exhaled. I saw the photos of the cabin, the garden shed, the book on the table. You didn't preserve a property. You preserved love and history and grief. Silence settled between them again, this time heavy with understanding. I went to see your ex-husband this morning, Brooke continued, looking down into her coffee like it held some kind of absolution. David? Margot's brows rose, but she didn't speak. I needed to hear it from him, Brooke explained. Whether he really knew, whether he was planning to lie to Ryan, he denied it at first, said I misunderstood. But when I mentioned the trust and the photos and the dates, he didn't deny it anymore. He just said, Margot always had a flair for drama. Margot smiled bitterly. That sounds like him. Brooke leaned forward. He doesn't want the cabin because it means anything to him. He wants it because you didn't lose, because you outplayed him. That's all this has ever been about for him. I know, Margot said. I didn't, Brooke whispered. Not until now. She took a breath, steadied herself. I canceled the wedding, she said. Margot's eyes narrowed. You what? Not the marriage, Brooke clarified quickly, but the performance, the venue, the guest list, the six-figure seating chart designed by people who don't know our names. That part's done. Margot stared at her, caught off guard. Does Ryan know? Brooke nodded slowly. He's still processing. But when I told him I didn't want a marriage that started by excluding his mother, he didn't fight me. He just cried. Margot hadn't seen Ryan cry since he was 10, since his father forgot his school play. He's afraid you'll never forgive him, Brooke said. Margot looked out the cafe window. That's not what he needs to be afraid of. Brooke was silent. Margot turned back. He should be afraid I'll forgive him too easily, that I'll pretend none of it mattered, that I'll shrink myself again to make him feel whole, and then we'll go right back to who we were before. Brooke's eyes welled. He's trying, Margot. He really is. But he's been shaped by a man who taught him appearances mattered more than people. He's only just starting to unlearn that. Margot studied her for a long moment, then asked gently, And you? What are you unlearning? Brooke sat with that question. Finally, she said, That strength means control, that silence is elegance, that love should be edited before it's shown. She looked up, a sudden plea in her voice. I want something different, for us, for our future children, if they ever come. Margot blinked. It was the first time anyone had spoken of grandchildren. The words hit her somewhere deep, somewhere that had stopped believing in the idea. I don't want them raised in a world where legacy means money, Brooke continued. I want them to know what you built, what you protected, what it means to love something enough to hide it, just to keep it alive. Margot's throat tightened. She hadn't expected this. Not here. Not from Brooke. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was a black and white shot of her and a 4-year-old Ryan standing in front of the cabin. He was laughing. She was trying to smile through tears. She slid it across the table. I took that the summer before the divorce, she said. It was the last time we were a family in that cabin. I thought, maybe one day it could be where we become one again. Brooke looked at the photo, then at Margot, and nodded. I want to see it, she said softly. The cabin, with you, just me. Not Ryan, not yet. Margot hesitated. Then, all right. Have you ever had to confront the truth about someone you thought you knew completely? What Brooke sees at the cabin will either forge a new bond or shatter everything for good. Don't miss what unfolds next. They arrived just before dusk, when the last of the sun feathered gold across the tops of the pine trees, and the lake stretched out like glass, calm and waiting. Brooke didn't speak much on the drive. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, hands resting on her lap, eyes watching the landscape shift from city concrete to wild green. Margot, behind the wheel of her old Volvo, said even less. She didn't know what to expect from the day, or from Brooke. But a strange calm had settled in her chest, the kind that only comes after you've already survived the worst part. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as they pulled into the clearing at Summit Hollow. The cabin came into view slowly, like something exhaled from the woods. Weathered cedar siding, green shutters, stone chimney, exactly as it had always been. Brooke stepped out of the car and took a long breath. It smells like memory, she said softly. Margot gave a small smile. It does that. They walked the perimeter together first. Margot pointed out the tree her father planted the year she was born. The handmade birdhouse Ryan had painted at 6. The dock rebuilt after the storm in 92. Each detail carried weight, like artifacts in a museum of a life quietly curated. Inside, Margot opened the door and let Brooke walk ahead. The cabin was warm, lived in, a place that had known stories and held them without judgment. quilts folded at the foot of the bed, a chipped teapot on the counter, books lining the walls, not for show, but for remembering. Brooke moved slowly through the space, her fingers trailing over surfaces like she was afraid to disturb anything. "It's not just a house," she whispered. "No," Margot said. "It's a witness." They sat for hours on the screened porch. Margot made tea the way her mother had taught her. Brooke cried quietly when she saw the family photo albums, not for any specific image, but for the realization that she'd nearly been part of destroying something sacred out of convenience and appearances. "I keep thinking about your silence," Brooke said at one point, her voice raw. "How much it must have cost to carry all this alone." "It didn't feel like silence," Margot replied. "It felt like protection, like love. But I see now that maybe I mistook invisibility for strength." Brooke didn't argue. She just reached for Margot's hand and held it, both women sitting in a space neither of them had expected, but perhaps had always needed. That night, Brooke stayed in the cabin's guest room. Margot took the master, though she didn't sleep. Instead, she stood by the window, watching the stars reflect in the water, thinking about how easy it is to become a ghost in your own family, and how hard it is to come back to life. 2 days later, Ryan called. "I heard you went to the cabin," he said. "She invited me," Margot replied. "I didn't ask why." Ryan was quiet for a beat. "She came home changed." Margot waited. "She told me she wants to be married there," he added. "At the cabin. Just a small ceremony. Family, friends, people who matter. Would you be willing to help us plan it?" Margot closed her eyes. The pain in her chest twisted, but it wasn't sharp this time. It was something softer, something healing. "I would," she said, "but only if we're honest. About everything. No performances. No edits." "Agreed." There was a pause. "Mom," he said, and the word felt different this time. Less reflex, more reaching. "I want to understand what you built, what you gave up. I don't want to inherit the cabin. I want to earn the right to help care for it." Margot's hand tightened around the phone. "You're already starting," she said. The wedding was held 6 weeks later, just as the leaves began to turn. No floral archways, no crystal chandeliers. Just a canopy of golden trees, a wooden table draped in linen, and string lights hung from pine branches like stars brought down to earth. Margot wore the same navy dress from the dinner in Seattle, but this time she held her head high. Her hair, streaked with silver, was pinned back with her mother's comb. Brooke's dress was simple, timeless, and barefoot on the dock. She looked more herself than Margot had ever seen her. The ceremony was brief, beautiful, honest. When it was over and the sun had just dipped behind the hills, Ryan stood before their small circle of guests and cleared his throat. "I used to think legacy meant money," he said. "Assets, things you could own or sell. But standing here, I understand now, legacy is what you protect when no one's watching. It's the stories you keep alive when they're no longer popular. It's the courage to stay when everyone else tells you to let go." He turned to Margot. "My mother didn't just preserve this cabin. She preserved our family, and I'm only just beginning to see what that cost her." He held up an envelope. "I asked our lawyer to amend the trust." Again. Margot frowned slightly, unsure. "It no longer names me as a beneficiary," Ryan said. "Instead, it establishes a stewardship foundation overseen by both of us and eventually our children. No one person can ever sell or destroy it. It will be cared for forever, because something this sacred shouldn't belong to a single name." Margot felt the tears come, uninvited but welcome. After the guests had gone and the lanterns burned low, Margot sat alone on the dock, feet just above the water, heart full and aching. Brooke approached quietly, barefoot, holding 2 cups of tea. "One for the matriarch," she said, passing a mug. Margot took it with a smile. "Careful. That's a title you'll inherit sooner than you think." Brooke laughed, sitting beside her. "I hope I'm ready." "You will be," Margot said, "because you asked the right questions. You saw what mattered before it was too late." Brooke looked out at the moonlight shimmering on the lake. "We're thinking of naming our daughter Eleanor," she said softly. "If she's a girl." Margot froze. Then she closed her eyes. The ache, the weight, the years, all of it collapsed into something quiet and beautiful. "I think she'll love this place," she whispered. And somewhere, beneath the old pine trees and the whispers of the water, it felt like the past had finally released its grip. The cabin had never been just wood and stone. It was a second chance. And this time, Margot wasn't alone. How did this story make you feel? Did the ending touch something personal in you? Comment 100 if this story stayed with you. Where in the world are you watching from? If this story moved you, share it with someone you love. Thank you for watching Life Stories.